Okay, it says I'm sharing my content. Dennis, any ideas what's doing wrong?
I'm troubleshooting now.
Okay. Well, I'm going to keep talking.
Yes, please.
Time will go. So what I just want to share with you what we bring to the table in terms of our sort of perceptions of mental health, of family engagement. And Deb will get into the specific principles, but really because we have lived in the mental health world, that's really where kind of our ideas of family engagement have come from. And there's a few principles within mental health that I think are very applicable, and you'll hear Deb talk more about that. The first is being trauma-informed, which when you think about it, absolutely makes sense. As educators, you're talking and hearing and learning about being trauma-informed and how to support students with trauma. Well, if you think about a lot of their trauma experiences, they're based in family relationships or family experiences. So if our children are experiencing trauma, their families are experiencing trauma as well. So our approach to engagement needs to be trauma-informed. Within mental health, we also talk about being person-centered and strengths-based. And what that means is that we help people leverage their own strengths and using those in providing support in helping them identify self-care, helping them engage. And the person-centered is really that idea that every family comes to our schools and our communities with different experiences. And so it's all about the person, and everyone is treated differently. So this also flows back into things like cultural humility and equity, those kinds of concepts that I know are really important within the education field. And then the idea of providing voice and choice. And that is giving them an opportunity to be engaged in making decisions and having discussions about what their needs are and being decision makers as part of the process. And so Deb will talk a lot about that. And then finally, family-driven care is another concept in mental health, and it really encompasses all of that, looking at the strengths of the family and really focusing on individual families. So our next poll is a poll that I'm going to turn over to Deb. And I know that you're super busy, Dennis, trying to figure out what I'm doing wrong here with my technology.
Just let me know if that poll opens. We'll get to that.
Yes, the poll is open. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. I think this polling question is a great way to remind us all, before we get involved more in the discussion of family engagement, to think about all of those different expressions of family engagement. So this question, what positive practices or celebrations make you feel the most engaged with your own family? And just choose two. We could have made a very long list because there's so much we could put on this slide. But I'll be curious to see what we come back to.
We have 5 seconds.
Dennis, are the slides being seen by other people? Has anyone mentioned that they're not?
It doesn't look like it. I'm only able to see. So let me finish with this poll. It's giving me a countdown, and then I'll. I cannot see the slides change. I am not seeing the slides change either.
No, neither am I.
Okay, Dennis, I'm going to send them to you, and I'm going to make you the boss here. My apologies. This worked yesterday, but it does look different for me today. We could talk about that afterwards for the afternoon.
Well, I think Somebody said something here, let's see. Um, so is the poll over?
So the poll is finished, and I'm trying to show the results, but it's not allowing me all of it.
Okay. Well, I think I'm just going to get going.
Yes.
And talk about, the poll obviously had listed some really great opportunities to let us know the expressions of engagement, like holidays, for instance. I think about holidays as being also inclusive of multi-generational, opportunities. We're hearing from all different cycles of life, and that's always exciting. And then traditions and rituals, I think about how much they tell our family story and how rich that can be for all of us, and probably why we love it so much. And then our family dinners, I think about how they connect us not only to our physical need for food, but also our emotional need for one another. It's really nice to sit down and be together as a family. And then working on projects, I think that reminds us of our commitments and our shared responsibilities, which is a principle of family engagement. And then being present in our conversations, I also think that supports our family goals, and it also provides us with new directions within the family. Usually when we sit down and we have those really heart-to-heart talks, the direction of our family may change. And then sharing in recreational activities, let's face it, that's that joy and laughter that a family needs to help reduce some of the stress that we're all under. And I just want to make a point of mentioning how much laughter diffuses family stress. And I wonder if we can all think quickly about a time in our own family where there might have been a family argument or a challenge, and then something unexpected happened, which only your unique family would think is funny, and the whole family would burst out in laughter. And I've had that happen in my family many times, and it's a great way to just release that stress. We don't talk enough about the power of laughter. So that's what I was thinking for the poll. Any results in on that? Okay, I'm just going to move on. And then, there's no simple way to define family. And the truth is, family means something different to all of us. And all of our families, we have a unique culture of our own, in addition to the larger cultures that we participate in. But the one thing that's universal about the meaning of a family is this. When you know family, you know about love, you know about survival, resilience, and strength. And a family provides us with a shared story. And we come to family through through biology, marriage, adoption, and friendships. And families are forever evolving. We welcome in new members of all ages, especially I love it when babies are entered. And we occupy various cultural identities. So building resilient families is really what upholds our society. But this is a standard definition on this slide, and unfortunately you probably can't see it, so I'll just read it to you. It says, engagement is the process of establishing effective relationships with a shared understanding of goals and commitments. And the key word on this slide is the word shared. So in the next couple of slides, I'm going to introduce a best practice that supports family engagement. And it's a slide, if you can't see it, it's a slide on trauma-informed approaches as a best practice for helping us all put those pieces together to strengthen family resilience and support family engagement. And there's 6 key principles of trauma-informed approaches, and Mahaney's 5 principles of family engagement, they focus on trauma-informed approaches that include a sense of emotional and physical safety, transparency, collaboration, peer support, empowerment through voice and choice, and being inclusive of a family's cultural considerations. The trauma associated with COVID-19 and the uncertainty that we've been all facing have promoted some fear for students, for family members, and educators. So moving forward, we really need to restore a safe emotional and physical space within the relationship. And for many students and family members that are living under chronic stress, they are usually waiting for that other shoe to drop. And this is a byproduct of living under chronic stress. So being transparent about our policies and scheduling, having clear boundaries that support building trust within a relationship, and collaborative partnerships really do promote family engagement by encouraging their lived experience as valuable in providing support. But this is what I want to point out. It's also important in providing solutions because families' voices are part of the solution. And families are the first responders, and that role provides valuable insight and information. So encouraging their voice and choice helps families regain their balance. Trauma-informed responses recognize the role that cultural practices and rituals have on healing and view culture as a family's anchor and their connection to their race, ethnicity, and historically grounded. Any luck with the slides? I'm going to just see what's going on here. Okay. I guess I will move on to the next slide. I apologize that you can't see these slides.
Deb, I think we can see them.
Okay.
I'm watching Dennis change them.
Oh, okay, great. We're on Healing Centered. Okay. Yeah. I want to mention the work of Sean Ginwright on Healing Centered Engagement because his work has focused on the collective experience of traumatic stress and loss in our schools, neighborhoods, families, and those that have suffered from disasters like hurricanes, etc. Sean Ginwright is an author and associate professor of Africana Studies at San Francisco State University, and his research examines the ways in which youth in urban communities navigate through the constraints of poverty and struggle to create equality and justice in their schools. Healing-centered engagement suggests that trauma is not just an individual experience, but a collective one. And it's akin to the South African term, and I hope I don't destroy it, Ubuntu, meaning that humanness is found through our interdependence, our collective engagement, and our service to others. Healing-centered engagement suggests that when individuals look at the root causes of collective trauma, the environmental factors that place the person in harm's way, that person will develop a sense of purpose and power and control over their lives, and those ingredients contribute to their healing and restoration. So healing-centered engagement is rooted in culture and addresses collective and historical trauma and is most definitely a trauma-informed approach. These 5 principles of engagement, Mahaney's 5 principles of engagement, nurture resiliency through the recognition that the relationship is the tool for modeling mutual respect, shared responsibilities, a commitment to education, and fostering community support. And these 5 principles are applicable for all engagement strategies because to be engaged in any relationship or project or activity requires seeing our role in an empowered way. And I want to review each of Mahaney's 5 principles of family engagement and comment on their role for successful and continuous engagement. There is consistent evidence that effective communication and relationship building creates environments in the school that are welcoming, respectful, and conducive to family engagement. This first bullet, mental health and wellness of students, it captures relationship. You know, at Mahaney's, we often say our health and well-being are never in isolation of others. So consider our loved ones and when they're not well, how that impacts us personally. A student's mental health and sense of well-being are not in isolation of their family members, their teachers, their friends, and their community. So to engage someone once is not nearly as difficult as continuous engagement, but relationships are all about this fourth bullet. And Amy and I were talking yesterday about how complex the relationship can become between educators and parents. And we were talking about how sometimes we get so defensive, like our mama bear comes out. And so I thought I would ask Amy if she would share a little bit about her experience, because I think it will help to bring this slide to life. Amy, are you okay with that?
Yeah, absolutely. When we were talking about relationships, and I was kind of reflecting on my own experience as a family member, it also wasn't just about my relationship as a family to the school, but the relationship of my children to the school. And I knew, and I kind of could watch. I have 3 kids, and they've all graduated at this point, but I can remember one in particular who sometimes struggled a little bit in school, but I recognized that he did well when he had really good relationships with his teachers. And I think I kind of internalized that a little bit as a parent over time. And so when he didn't have good relationships, that often came out in lots of phone calls home and, things that I felt were just, I think I just really related to that and felt like it must be really hard for him to hear his name called all day long and be redirected all day long. And so I think I just became really defensive, and so that impacted my relationship with the school. And for years I had that kind of defensive relationship when the phone rings and you get like all tense, and I really wanted to be involved in my school. In fact, I was involved in the PTA early on, and then as things got challenging, I really stepped back. And so I'm sure I was seen as kind of a resistant parent, but that was a little bit probably for the best in some cases too, because I was feeling defensive. And now I'm a board member. So I think that, that whole experience, and you all know that, as those of you who identified as caregivers and as family members, we send the best that we can to school every day, because we wouldn't send anything less than that. And sometimes it's difficult and sometimes it's challenging, but it really is all about those relationships, not just for the students, but for the family members as well. And I'm guilty of that. I'm guilty of being defensive and resistant, and I won't deny it.
I don't think you're alone, Amy. There's nothing that gets our back up more than when our kids aren't doing well, and it has nothing to do with the teachers. We usually go right to our own self-blame, but thank you so much for sharing that. I really think that makes this slide come to life. And this last bullet really says it all, and that is relationships do have the power to help heal and support growth. And you're going to hear, just to give you a heads up, you're going to hear the word relationship in the next few minutes quite often, because it truly is the backbone of really great family engagement. This is the second principle of engagement, and it asks us to consider that every family has a backstory, and we need to meet them wherever they're at. This first bullet on this slide asks us to remain open and become aware of any implicit bias that we may have. Although most biases are unconscious, we really can't make assumptions, because assumptions don't model mutual respect, and they're dangerous to any partnership. When we assume something about each other, we're thinking for that other person, and we're basically leaving them completely out of the relationship. When we assume something about a student or family, engagement will shut down, and the relationship will have no lifespan. And I know I've done that many times in my life when I've been told by people I love, please don't think for me. Please don't make assumptions and projections, and it really does harm the relationship. And then collective partnerships, opportunities for partnerships. The big takeaway here is how much that brings additional support within the relationship needs of students and families and educators. And encouraging voice and choice, one of the outcomes of experiencing trauma, and I think COVID-19 is a great example, is the loss of control and the loss of our familiar life. And that loss of control that accompanies trauma is seen in a student and a family's ability to actually engage and ask for help. So all of us have felt that lack of control in our life lately. And we benefit when we feel comfortable speaking up and asking for what we need. If, as professionals, we view our relationships with families as being in partnerships, we're more likely going to foster empowerment, because regaining balance involves regaining our voice and our choices, and the removal of the stigma associated with coping skills that help keep many families impacted by trauma alive. So if successful engagement is all about two-way communication, then understanding cultural perspectives on a family's ability to ask for help, to communicate with educators, and feel comfortable in systems that were designed without their voice will include practicing cultural humility. Next slide. Our families have a unique culture of their own in addition to the outer culture that they participate in. So practicing cultural humility is respecting that there is diversity within the many different racial, ethnic, religious practices, because families do interpret mental health and illness differently. And you can see that on this slide because our daily health choices are impacted by our culture, our patterns of thinking, what we do for self-care practices is impacted by our culture. Our perceptions of health, our definition of health, how we identify illness and what type of treatment that we're going to include in our lives. And the risk, I like this one on this slide, the risk factors are very different culturally. And then our health-seeking behaviors, who were we going to disclose to, that is very much driven by our culture. And, what methods we prefer also. So if this slide suggests exercising cultural humility is a best practice, but I want to mention it's also a trauma-informed response. This is the third principle. I want to mention it's in direct correlation to what defines families. This slide is offering us some ideas for emergent best practices, and the first one being enlisting cultural brokers. They're usually, there's one definition I really like of this, which says that cultural brokering is the act of bridging, linking, and mediating, between groups or persons of different cultural backgrounds for the purpose of reducing conflict or producing change. And they help to facilitate communication and support school staff in taking a more relational approach with families. And then encouraging family advocacy. Family advocates are typically family members supporting other family members within the school, which is a peer support model and also a trauma-informed approach. And then, encouraging collaborative initiatives that are mutually beneficial. When families, when educational settings encourage families to, be part of that, decision-making, both formally and as well as informally, they usually have an increase in success of family engagement. We know that mental health literacy saves lives, and engaging families to become mental health literate will require that a mutual learning environment that models all the other principles. Sharing the 5 principles of family engagement demonstrates that families are valued and respected. And a public health approach to mental health education means that families and caregivers learn about mental health just as much as educators and students are learning. And we know at the Mental Health Association, we often advocate for education on whole family health and well-being, because the integrity of a parent's health and well-being is vital to the health and well-being of their children. And I'm sure I don't have to, tell you that, because we see that all the time. We need healthy forms of support in our life. And this is the 5th principle in family engagement, which I think is very powerful. It's a strong focus on building and creating partnerships external to the school. School and community well-being are not in isolation of each other. And the community is our most valuable asset, and so often the most underutilized resources. When schools have the support of their community and they employ the members of the community, and this is the key, in the daily life of a school, they demonstrate all of these other 4 principles that we've been talking about. community relationships, respect for community involvement, sharing in goals and commitments within the community, education on community strengths, while learning how the community's culture impacts family engagement. So you can see that those 5 principles really can be instrumental in thinking of how our community can, be well and be a part of our school. Mahaney's 5 principles of engagement recognize that the relationship is the tool for successful engagement, and mutual respect adheres to best practices in family engagement. Shared responsibilities develop mutual learning environments for enhancing educational opportunities that support community involvement. I want to mention that most of us know that systems do not heal or save us. It's the relationships within those systems that support healing and growth. It's in our daily relationships that recovery begins and ends. Relationship is the first principle of family engagement because it's the tool for successful engagement, and all these other 4 principles are supporting the relationship. And I want to mention that these 5 principles support all relationships, be it with our children, our spouses, educators, our friends, our faith leaders, our employers, our colleagues. When I think of these 5 principles for my personal life, I think of them as a guidepost for me. If I want healthy relationships and I want to cultivate that in my own family, I often go back to these 5 principles. Research demonstrates that strong relationships between schools, families, and community members positively affect student achievement and outcomes. And I just wanted to quickly go through the benefits of family engagement. Increased participation and continuous engagement. And that's the key word here, continuous. It's easy to engage once, but it takes those 5 principles to keep that continuous engagement. Encouraging open communication, again, voice and choice. Cultivating a culture of belonging rather than othering, because othering is based in inequality and marginalizes people. And strengthens overall development into successful youth and students. And supports school and community well-being. We often advocate that our health and well-being are not in isolation of others, but neither is the health of our schools. Family engagement is not limited to helping children with homework. It also encompasses advocating with local school boards and state and federal governments to ensure that schools have what they need. And I think that those viewing can honestly think of families within the school system right now that have been strong advocates for quality of life issues within the school. Thank you, and I'm now going to pass this back to Amy.
Amy, you're muted.
I was just saying, it looks like we have this all figured out. But never mind. I wanted to thank Deb, and I wanted to thank all of you for kind of sticking with us through all of these difficulties. We're really going to rock this afternoon. So you can come back if you feel like you were cheated. Just as we kind of wrap up, and I'm going to move quickly through this, but I want to let you know 2 things. One is that I'm dropping in the chat a link to a Google document that we created, which outlines the principles or lists the principles, and also shares a lot of the resources that we've discussed so far and that I'm going to wrap up talking about. So you will have all those links. Also, I'm working with the TSS Institute to figure out how we can best get both a handout and a PDF of our PowerPoint shared with everyone. I believe they have a system for that, so I just need to work on that. But as we kind of wrap this up, I want to start talking a little bit about some of the barriers because, now that we have an understanding of family engagement and it seems so basic and doable, and it's really about people connecting, we know that sometimes it's hard. And as Deb said, that sometimes there are great advocates in your community, great advocates in the families of your students, but sometimes we still struggle to get them engaged. And so how can we best do that? The first thing is we have to recognize what some of those barriers are. And in mental health, a really, really big one is stigma. And stigma is just these negative beliefs and attitudes. They perpetuate across generations and across time. They lead to discrimination, and it's usually based on some kind of perceived characteristic or difference. So it could be race, it could be culture, disability, health, it could be experiences. So think about, and some communities are different, and this has changed over time, but things like being the child of a divorced parent, or having been incarcerated. We know when people come back into the community, they experience stigma. So there's lots of experiences too. It's not just how people are perceived. But whatever that stigmatizing attitude is and wherever it comes from, it has a significant impact both on children and on families. It impacts their willingness to engage. I shared for me that I just kind of got defensive. It was really about feeling stigmatized and blamed, and I was just going to kind of shut down, and I wasn't engaging. It impacts a person's self-worth. It impacts their ability to ask for help, and not just the individual, but the family too. And then, of course, it limits, because of all that, it could limit some opportunities, whether it's social or academic. So again, I think the big one when we think about family engagement is that when parents encounter stigma, it impacts their ability to ask for help for their child as well. It's not that they don't care, but it's that stigma. And so there's two different kinds of stigma that we want to take a closer look at. One is courtesy and one is self-stigma. Courtesy stigma is something that's been around for decades, but we don't talk about it very much. And I think it's actually really relevant in schools. Courtesy stigma is stigma by association. And the reason I think that's relevant is because, thinking about family members. So I mentioned that I have 3 kids. I think you all probably have, seen this happen, or maybe you yourself has had this happen. But when my youngest one entered school, and it was that first day of school, and they were going through the attendance list, and they'd call out his name, and they'd look at him and they'd say, "Are you like your sister or are you like your brother?" And he eventually learned to say neither, because one was like this almost impossible standard to live to, and then the other one was a label that he didn't want to be associated with. So it's just a natural thing that happens. I think another place where we see it in schools is in targets of bullying. So if a student is a target of bullying, the kids who surround them or try to stick up for them, sometimes they can become targets of bullying too. And so it's that stigma by association. And then self-stigma is when we internalize those negative public beliefs. And this can extend to the family unit, and it leads to feelings of blame and that should be shame. And it leads to people feeling hopeless and helpless. Like, it doesn't matter what I do, this is always going to kind of follow me. So again, it kind of goes back to that idea of the perception of families who are resistant or hard to reach. And I like to think about it in the context of an invisible backpack. So if you think about your students, and you all have probably actually seen this cartoon, so I didn't want to use it, but there's this cartoon out there where the little kid is in the hallway, and he's got like a bunch of luggage tucked under his arm, and they're labeled homeless, hunger, poverty. And what essentially that cartoon is telling us is that kids come to school carrying all this baggage, and it has an impact on them. I like to use this, the kind of analogy with an invisible backpack. Our kids come to school in an invisible backpack. It has positive things in it and it has negative things in it, and they impact their education. So negative things might be health disparities or health problems. Negative things might be a lack of intrinsic motivation. It might be traumatic experiences. They also carry those positive things, right? They carry with them access to all the tools and resources that they need. They carry with them a willingness to learn or an excitement for learning. But their families have invisible backpacks too. And so when we're expecting them to come to school and engage for whatever reason, however we're trying to do that, they're bringing their own stuff with them. And as Deb and I were talking, she had a story about this too.
Yeah, I wanted to mention that, I too am a mother of 4. They're all grown now, and I have 7 grandchildren. But when I was raising my daughters, I am dyslexic, and I had a really, negative experience in the school system, and especially back in my day, I went to school in the 60s and early 70s. So, I went through my entire school without ever being diagnosed with dyslexia, but I knew something was wrong, and, I felt, a lot of shame. And it kept me from, I didn't realize that when I had my daughters, I was very active in making sure that they were, going to be, educated people. But I did not really press into the school system very much. And I do know that it was because I felt uncomfortable, going even into the school because of some of the early trauma that I had experienced. And I'll never forget the first time Amy asked me to do a presentation with her. I told her, I said, oh my gosh, I said, I've been presenting to people my whole career, to audiences, but I'm petrified to present in front of teachers, and luckily, she encouraged me to do it anyway, and I did, and now I'm okay with it. But I want to mention that because there are families like mine who may have had a negative experience, not just due to, poverty and things like that. It could be due to like a learning disability that they still, struggle with. And I think that was my case very much with my daughters. So I just wanted to bring that to light as well.
Thanks, Deb.
Yeah.
So glad you did that presentation with me. So Deb mentioned cultural humility in different ways before, and so I don't want to go into this too much. I think we should dedicate hours to it. But cultural humility is a best practice, and when we engage families, that is really being sensitive and cognizant of being things like other-oriented. So that sort of aligns with what we talked about before with being family-driven care and person-centered. It's about asking questions and listening. What do you need? How can we help? Being respectful and non-judgmental and sensitive to historic realities. And that's something that I think has been on the forefront of everyone's minds throughout the summer, given the protests around racial injustice and police brutality. So just being sensitive to what those realities are for some cultures. And also recognizing that it's a process that requires us to be lifelong learners. And we talk about our students, many of you use this terminology in your school goals and in your curriculum, but we want our students to be lifelong learners. We need to be lifelong learners and active participants in this process of being culturally humble. So strategies, again, I'm going to go through this super, super fast, but I think one of the first things is just in terms of going back to that idea of asking questions and listening. One way we can do this is to do it through surveys. And, one of the benefits of this pandemic has been a lot of resources are becoming more widely available. We're recognizing this to schools. And so Panorama Education has some really great resources and traditionally have had some costs associated with it. And sometimes that makes it difficult for schools. But in this case, they're offering a lot of back to school surveys and other school surveys that are free. So I share that and encourage you to take a look at those. And even if you didn't want to use their surveys, it kind of gives you a good example of maybe some of the questions that you could ask. I would also say, if you survey your families at the beginning of the summer, survey them again, because people are feeling differently as time goes by and things are changing so rapidly. And maybe survey them a few weeks into the school year. I think people are coming in with a lot of anxiety, but if things are working out really, really well, we may find them feeling very differently. So these surveys have to happen pretty regularly. Another way to get information, I think, and to practice that cultural humility is through restorative practices in schools. And this could sound like a heavy lift because it is. There's a lot of really important training that goes along with restorative practices, and many of you probably are familiar with restorative practices and know the benefits. And, we talk about relationships and reducing disciplinary problems, building community. I want to say, though, that this does connect back to things like social emotional learning. It reduces disciplinary problems because it teaches kids conflict resolution. It teaches them problem solving skills. It helps them become self-aware and learn to sort of manage themselves. And so this is where we see all of these kind of practices really converging. And there's a great role for families in restorative practices. And if we had time, and I feel like we don't, and I'm also worried about technology right now, I was going to share with you, Chicago Public Schools has Parent Peace Center, and it is on the handout. So again, if you look at your chat, you see a Google Drive, and there's a handout there, and some of the resources include things like this Parent Peace Center. And the video is really, to me, very inspiring and very overwhelming, because what they've done is they've taken the family members and community members and brought them into the restorative practices process and made it really about community. And they're leading those practices, and they're leading those kinds of circles, and really helps to, again, promote community and build communities of support and provides a voice. And restorative practices in and of itself, I think, is something that's really important if you choose to do it, to make sure that you have the training that you need. But there's also sort of borrowing from restorative practices. Some of the techniques, and healing circles is one of them. And if you also are familiar with responsive classroom, they have morning meetings. The ideas are kind of the same. They're rooted in ancient traditions of our indigenous cultures that really recognizes that trust and equity. And someone mentioned earlier when I was asking about family engagement that trust is huge, but it's really hard to get and to grow. But, healing circles could be sort of a practice or an opportunity to do that. And there's lots of different resources available online for how to facilitate healing circles. But the idea of just creating this safe space for learning. And when this is done and it's facilitated by community members, it really can provide opportunities for that trust to build and for people to feel like they have a voice in the process. So I just want to share those with you really briefly. We could spend hours talking about restorative practices, but there is some really great resources on the handout, and I really encourage you to take a look at that video. Deb had mentioned education, and I had mentioned that education in terms of mental health education. This is a place where I think we also have a great opportunity to engage families, because it's really about beginning the conversation about some of these challenges that our students might be experiencing, and some of the reasons why we might be trying to engage families to kind of help us address some of those concerns. It gives us an opportunity to talk about it at that universal tier 1 level, where everyone is getting information about mental health. Everyone in the school community knows that your school values the mental health and wellness of the students. When you teach them social emotional learning skills, you share those with the families. You help families know what resources are available to them in their communities. It's not just when there's a problem that I hear from the school about that. That is just messaging that goes out all the time. And it gives us a little bit of freedom, too, as schools, to be able to share some more positive things as well. So we're not always just engaging when there's a problem, but that we're offering resources and talking about social emotional learning and talking about self-awareness and sharing mindfulness practices. If our kids are doing it in school, we want the same kind of information and knowledge to go home so families can encourage that. Just like you would with a math skill, you want to with a social emotional learning skill. And so it's a way to engage and involve families. The research around mental health education comes from something called mental health literacy, which is not just a child-centered kind of a strategy or an idea. It's really a public health approach, like Deb said, to recognizing that when communities have a better understanding of mental health and treatments and stigma, and when they know how to get help, they tend to do it sooner, and they tend to have better health outcomes. And so building those kind of that knowledge and that education in your community is a great way to engage families with some really important information. We've made this as easy for you as possible. We have a grant this year, and we are running 30-minute webinars. The intended audience is families and caregivers, and we do a different topic every month. They're on our website. That link is also available to you in that Google Drive document. And we have some other resources available too, just information resources, education. So you could share this out through your social media, you could share this out through your website, you could somehow share this out at the beginning of the school. What you do, and I know it sounds self-promotional, and it kind of is, but what you do in the process is you tell families that you value mental health. and you value whole family wellness like we discussed, and that you are there and available to help if anything is needed. So it kind of opens that door and helps to build that trust that I don't just, as a parent, I don't want to just hear about mental health when there's a problem. If you're sending this message to me that it's something you value, that paints a very different picture. Deb also has a program that is really beneficial and could be helpful to you. And so I want to give Deb a second to talk about that as well. She might, Deb, you're on mute too. We keep muting ourselves.
Thank you, Amy. This is a wonderful tool. We call it a transition support tool, because it really is about strengthening the health of the family after someone's been in treatment, or a crisis within the home that may not have, included any hospitalization or treatment. But it really is about, getting our parents and our families healthy as well as their loved one. And that, what we do in this program is the youth, in this case, the student, would identify, either family members or other supporters in their life that they would like to be a part of this program with them. And a care path coach is going to walk them through the first 90 to 120 days. And they're going to all learn together, about the continuum of wellness and about, the process involved in being well. And I think that that's hugely important, because a lot of times we have very unrealistic expectations of the process. And this is a trauma-informed tool as well. And we've had really good luck with folks from for all different reasons wanting to be a part of this program. So there's more about this in your resource guide as well, and our webpage talks extensively about it. My dream is to see a care path coach in every school. I would love to see that happen. So that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Deb. And, like us, there are lots of great community collaborations that could be helpful in engaging families, but also your families are community members, and many of your family members, parents, and caregivers hold key roles in the community. So when you look at that video from the Parent Peace Center, you'll see that it was community members who came in and got involved in those restorative practices. That may not be the best fit for you and for your school, but there may be other ways to engage them through sharing of their own stories, their cultural experiences, or career experiences, or whatever it might be. There's often opportunities to engage parents and caregivers, and they're very happy to do that. I think community schools is a great model, but it's also something that not everyone has access to due to finances and things like that. But the concept of community schools is so important, being able to get those resources to the school, meeting people where they are at. Sometimes a school may not be the best place. I know there's one school talked about retrofitting kind of a bus and bringing the bus out and having the school social workers and the school counselors on the bus and being able to provide services to families in that way. Or maybe it's the school nurse, or maybe it's the doctor who does the physicals, or whatever it might be. Just thinking about meeting people where they're at. Sometimes in communities, the place where everyone congregates is in a place of worship, or at the fire department. A lot of times in rural communities, a lot of community events happen around there. So for families who don't feel comfortable coming to the school for whatever reason, whatever they're carrying in their invisible backpack, meeting them where they're at, out in the community, whether it's a library, place of worship, firehouse, could be really beneficial. Maybe that's where you host your parent nights. And thinking about what their needs are. Recognizing that sometimes it's, not being able to have childcare. So if you can provide childcare, that is, a huge benefit. A couple other resources that are available in terms of assessments, the National PTA also has a family survey assessment, and that kind of reaches out to communities. And the Office of Mental Health right now is working on a project with the university, with some funding with the University of Maryland for an assessment system called SHAPE. All capital letters. I can't remember what it stands for. You may have seen it. It's a great resource and is now available to us with some technical assistance and support. Our email will be at the end, and you can contact me. I do have a flyer, and I'll try to get it shared with everyone. But if I can't figure that out, then definitely email us. And then the last thing is self-care and self-compassion. It's at the heart of family engagement because other people's struggles impact us. And sometimes we carry that. That's that kind of secondary trauma. So practicing compassion means that we're holding space and we're not trying to fix problems. There is another great resource by Wise, Wisconsin, and they offer compassion resilience toolkits, and there's actually 3 of them. One is for schools, one is for family members and or families, and one is for health and human service providers. But that's a great resource too. There's a lot contained in this, but if you wanted to do something and just weren't sure what tools and resources, this is a great place to start. So with that, I'll pause for a moment and see if anyone has any questions. I know we're right at 10:30, and we apologize for our technical difficulties and are kind of feeling rushed at the end here. But this is our website, our email address. You are welcome to email us if you have any questions. If you are in need of any support related to technical assistance or professional development, we're happy to help. And I'll just pause for a moment, see if there's any questions.
Amy, I have one question. I don't know that if you can see them, but you will be able to provide a copy of the PDF.
Yeah, I think so. I believe it's through the TSS Institute. There's a place where they have those handouts, but this is the email address. So if you don't see it there, email us. But most of what you would be looking for in terms of resources and links and things like that are contained in that Google document. All right, well, I'm going to end here. This is our website if you are looking for any additional information. And Dennis, thank you. Thank you so much for sticking with us.
I'm sorry. Any technical difficulty was probably my fault. You guys did a great job.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you so much.
And everyone enjoy the rest of your institute.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.